My name is William James Harper, and I'm 39 years old. I have deep black hair that I keep precisely styled, short on the sides, with just enough length on top to look professional in television interviews. My eyes are an unusual shade of dark green, almost forest-colored, and they have a way of making sources feel comfortable enough to tell me things they probably shouldn't. My face is lean and angular, with a square jaw that photographs well, and a mouth that rarely reveals what I'm thinking until I want it to. There's a small scar just above my left eyebrow from a piece of debris during the Hurricane Katrina coverage, a reminder that good journalism sometimes requires getting uncomfortably close to the story. For 13 years, I was the senior investigative reporter at the Chicago Herald, one of the Midwest's most respected newspapers. I did just write articles. I uncovered truth. Municipal corruption, corporate fraud, environmental cover-ups, the stories that mattered to real people living real lives. My investigations had led to 3 mayoral resignations, 2 federal indictments, and countless policy changes that made the city safer and more accountable. The Columbia Journalism Review called my work the gold standard for investigative reporting in digital media. Then, executive editor Patricia Kellerman decided my stories took too long and cost too much to produce. The meeting happened on a humid Wednesday in August, in Patricia's glass-walled office overlooking the newsroom where I'd spent over a decade pursuing stories that other reporters wouldn't touch. She sat behind her modern steel desk, wearing one of those expensive blazers she'd started buying after the paper's acquisition by Meridian Media Group. Beside her sat Tom Reeves, the new managing editor. They'd brought in from a tabloid in Los Angeles a man who measured journalistic success in clicks and ad revenue rather than public impact. "Well," Patricia began, using the casual nickname I'd never encouraged from management, "we need to discuss your reporting priorities and resource allocation." I'd seen this coming since Meridian bought the Herald 6 months earlier. Corporate journalism, with its focus on engagement metrics and content optimization, had been slowly strangling real investigative work across the industry. My months-long investigations into city council corruption and pharmaceutical company malfeasance suddenly seemed inefficient to their profit-focused minds. "The media landscape is changing rapidly," she continued, sliding papers across her desk. "Readers want immediate, accessible content. Breaking news, lifestyle pieces, social media-driven stories. Your investigative work, while admirable, requires too much time and resources for uncertain returns." I stared at the termination agreement disguised as a restructuring opportunity. 13 years of holding powerful people accountable. 13 years of stories that had changed lives and improved communities. 13 years of my sources, my contacts in government and law enforcement, my carefully cultivated relationships with whistleblowers and activists. All of it reduced to uncertain returns on corporate investment. "We're bringing in Ashley Chun from BuzzFeed," Tom added with the confidence of someone who'd never spent months developing a single source or years, building expertise in complex subjects. "She specializes in viral content and rapid turnaround investigations, the kind of journalism that drives traffic and social engagement." The irony was devastating. Ashley Chen was known for exactly the kind of surface-level reporting. I'd spent my career trying to elevate beyond flashy exposes that generated clicks but rarely led to meaningful change, investigations that prioritized entertainment value over substantive impact. "I appreciate your contributions to the paper's reputation," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she was already mentally allocating my office space to someone else. "This represents an evolution in our approach, not a judgment on the quality of your work." I maintained the composure that had carried me through countless hostile interviews with corrupt officials. 13 years of building the Herald's reputation as a paper that wasn't afraid to challenge power. 13 years of stories that exposed fraud, prevented environmental disasters, and protected vulnerable communities from exploitation. None of it mattered to Meridian's quarterly profit projections. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting the corporate interference in newsroom decisions for months. Not because I'd planned to use it against them, but because I was a journalist investigating power was what I did, even when that power was signing my paychecks. As I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, removing the awards I'd won for investigative excellence, the framed thank you letters from readers whose lives had been changed by my reporting, the thick files of ongoing investigations that would never see publication, I thought about all the stories I'd witnessed from inside the industry. The stories that had been killed for political reasons, the sources who'd been abandoned when they became inconvenient, the times Patricia had asked me to soften criticism of major advertisers. I'd covered Patricia's own rise to executive editor 5 years earlier, writing a profile that praised her commitment to investigative journalism. Real journalism isn't about giving readers what they want, she'd said. It's about giving them what they need to be informed citizens. Now that same woman was firing me for doing exactly that. 2 weeks after my termination, I received a call from Marcus Washington, editor-in-chief of The Independent Voice, a digital news outlet that specialized in the kind of investigative reporting traditional newspapers were abandoning. I'd met him at journalism conferences over the years and respected his commitment to in-depth reporting despite limited resources. "Will," his voice was urgent and concerned, "I need to see you as soon as possible. Something's happening that you need to know about." We met at a coffee shop in Hyde Park, far from the downtown media bubble where industry gossip traveled fast. Marcus ordered 2 black coffees and got directly to the point. "Patricia Kellerman has been reaching out to contacts across the industry," he said quietly. "She's telling people that your departure from the Herald was ... performance related." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about career transition. Patricia was actively sabotaging my professional reputation in a field where credibility was everything. "She's suggesting that your investigations had become sloppy, that you were taking too long to produce stories because you couldn't adapt to modern journalism standards." Marcus continued, choosing his words carefully, "that the Herald had to let you go to maintain their editorial integrity. The lies were strategically crafted. In journalism, being labeled as slow or sloppy was career death. If word spread that I couldn't meet deadlines or verify sources properly, no serious news organization would trust me with significant stories." "Why are you warning me about this?" I asked. Marcus leaned forward, studying my face. "Because I've read your work for years. Your investigation into the water contamination scandal saved thousands of people from lead poisoning. Your series on municipal bond fraud recovered millions in taxpayer money. Patricia Kellerman wouldn't recognize real journalism if it won a Pulitzer Prize." He paused, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "Also because I have a proposition." That afternoon, Marcus outlined his offer. The Independent Voice was launching an investigative unit with funding from a foundation grant. Serious money dedicated to the kind of long-form journalism that corporate newspapers were abandoning. They wanted a reporter who understood that real investigations took time, that important stories weren't measured in page views, but in public impact. "I'm offering you the position of senior investigative correspondent," Marcus said. "Complete editorial independence, time to develop stories properly, and resources to pursue investigations wherever they lead." The opportunity was everything I dreamed of during my years of fighting corporate interference at the Herald. A chance to do journalism the way it was supposed to be done, with editors who understood that significant stories required significant investment. "There's one thing I should mention," Marcus added with a slight smile. "We compete directly with the Herald for breaking news, investigative scoops, and industry recognition. Our stories often end up being compared to theirs in media criticism and journalism awards. The situation wasn't accidental. Marcus had been watching the Herald's decline under corporate ownership, waiting for the right opportunity to demonstrate what independent journalism could accomplish. I accepted his offer that same day. The next 6 months were the most productive of my career. Without corporate advertisers to appease or profit margins to consider, I could pursue investigations based solely on their importance to the public. I developed sources who'd been afraid to talk to corporate-owned media, uncovered stories that other outlets couldn't or wouldn't touch, produced the kind of journalism that reminded people why a free press mattered. I called my approach accountability journalism. because the best reporting holds power accountable to the people it's supposed to serve. While I was developing my new investigations, I learned what Patricia was doing at the Herald. Ashley Chen had indeed taken over, implementing exactly the kind of click-driven content strategy I'd expected. Quick investigations based on social media rumors exposes that prioritized viral potential over factual verification. Stories designed for maximum engagement rather than meaningful impact. The media industry trade publications initially praised the Herald's digital transformation and audience engagement improvements. But serious journalists and longtime readers were less impressed. Several veteran reporters quietly expressed concerns about the paper's editorial direction. Circulation among educated, affluent readers, the demographic most valuable to quality advertisers, was declining. Meanwhile, my work at the Independent Voice was gaining recognition among journalists who still believed in investigative excellence. I was invited to speak at press freedom conferences, to consult with news organizations struggling to balance commercial pressures with editorial integrity, to mentor young reporters who wanted to learn traditional investigative techniques. 4 weeks before my first major investigation was published, Patricia called me. "Will," her voice carried forced collegiality, "I've been following your new work with interest. Perhaps we could discuss it over lunch." We met at a restaurant downtown, the same place where she'd taken me to celebrate my series on police department corruption 3 years earlier. Patricia looked different, less confident, more calculating. The editorial authority she'd displayed during our final meeting had been replaced by something approaching desperation. "I understand you're working on some significant investigations," she began carefully. "It's been rewarding work," I replied neutrally. "Listen," she continued, "there may have been some miscommunication about your departure from the Herald. Some people got the wrong impression about our restructuring decisions." I remained silent, waiting to see what she'd actually come to say. "I'd like to discuss bringing you back as a freelance contributor. You could maintain your independence while giving Herald readers access to your investigative work. It would be mutually beneficial." The desperation was obvious now. Patricia had realized that having her former star investigative reporter at a competing outlet might create uncomfortable comparisons in journalistic quality and public impact. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but the Independent Voice provides everything I need for my investigations." Patricia's diplomatic facade cracked slightly. "Well, you have to understand the position this puts the Herald in. We've been Chicago's premier newspaper for over a century. This kind of direct competition feels unnecessarily personal." "It's not personal," I replied calmly. "It's professional. I'm investigating stories that serve the public interest. Where I choose to publish that work is a business decision." The lunch ended awkwardly, with Patricia making vague references to industry courtesy and professional relationships. I left feeling more determined than ever to prove that independent journalism could outperform corporate media in every meaningful way. 2 days later, I received a letter from the Herald's legal team. They were claiming that several of my ongoing investigations used confidential sources developed during my employment with their newspaper. The letter was professionally written, but legally questionable, an intimidation tactic designed to delay my publication schedule. I forwarded it to Marcus's attorney, who responded with surgical precision. He noted that journalistic sources couldn't be owned by employers, that I've been developing investigative contacts for over a decade before Patricia became editor, and that any attempt to restrict my professional practice would constitute illegal restraint of trade. He also included documentation showing that many of my sources had specifically sought me out because they trusted my integrity over the Herald's corporate editorial policies. Most importantly, he mentioned that any false claims about source ownership would result in a defamation lawsuit that would expose the Herald's declining editorial standards to public scrutiny. Patricia's lawyers never sent another letter. My first major investigation for the Independent Voice published on a Tuesday morning in February. The story exposed a pharmaceutical company's cover-up of severe side effects in a diabetes medication revealing internal documents that showed executives knew about the dangers but continued marketing to vulnerable patients. The investigation had taken 4 months, required dozens of interviews, and included medical expert analysis that corporate newspapers could no longer afford. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, federal regulators announced they were launching their own investigation. By evening, 3 law firms had filed class action lawsuits on behalf of patients. The pharmaceutical company's stock price dropped 15%, and their CEO resigned within a week. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a diabetes specialist who'd been trying to get media attention for the medication's dangers for 2 years. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice emotional, "thank you for listening when no one else would. Your investigation is going to save lives." The story won the Society of Professional Journalists Award for Investigative Excellence and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. More importantly, it demonstrated that independent journalism could achieve the kind of impact that corporate media was abandoning in pursuit of profit margins. Meanwhile, the Herald was struggling with Ashley Chen's approach. Their click-driven investigations generated social media buzz but rarely led to meaningful consequences. Several stories had been quietly retracted after fact-checking problems emerged. Most damaging, the paper's credibility with serious sources was declining as government officials and corporate whistleblowers began turning to outlets they considered more reliable. 6 months after my investigation published, the Chicago Journalism Review ran a comparative analysis of local news outlets' public impact over the previous year. The article highlighted the independent voice's return to traditional investigative excellence, while noting the Herald's transition toward engagement-focused content. The results were stark. My single investigation had generated more concrete policy changes and legal consequences than all of the Herald's investigations combined during the same period. In the same issue, the Herald was mentioned primarily for their innovative digital strategies, but the tone suggested that innovation had come at the expense of journalistic substance. 2 days after that article appeared, Patricia showed up at the Independent Voice offices during my afternoon deadline crunch. I watched through the glass conference room as she asked to speak with Marcus, then waited in the lobby for nearly an hour before he agreed to see her. After their meeting, Marcus approached my desk. "She wants to speak with you," he said quietly. "Privately." I found Patricia in the small conference room, looking older and less composed than I'd ever seen her. She sat across from the table where I'd been editing my latest investigation, a story about environmental contamination that the Herald's advertisers would never allow them to publish. "I'd made a mistake," she said without preamble. "What you accomplished with that pharmaceutical investigation, the impact, the thoroughness, the public service, that's what the Herald used to stand for." I remained quiet, letting her continue. "Ashley generates traffic, but she doesn't change anything. People read her stories, share them on social media, and then forget them. You create investigations that actually matter, that make communities safer." Patricia paused, staring at her hands. "I spent 2 years focused on metrics and revenue streams, and I lost sight of why newspapers exist. To hold power accountable, to protect people who can't protect themselves, to provide information that helps citizens make informed decisions. What are you asking, Patricia?" She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since entering the room. "I want you to come back. As investigative editor with complete independence, you could rebuild our investigative unit, hire your own team, pursue any story you consider important." The irony was perfect. 8 months ago, she'd dismissed my approach as inefficient and outdated. Now she was offering me editorial control because that same approach had achieved exactly what newspapers claim to want: meaningful public impact. "I'm flattered by the offer," I said carefully, "but I have commitments here. Stories in development, sources who trust this organization." "Name your terms," Patricia pressed. "I'll match whatever Marcus is paying, plus you'd have the Herald's resources and circulation. Think of how many more people you could reach." I stood up, looking out the window at the city I'd been investigating and protecting for over a decade. "Some trust can't be rebuilt, Patricia." You taught me that when you decided clicks were more important than consequences. As she prepared to leave, Patricia made one final attempt. You're making a mistake, Will. The Herald reaches 500,000 readers daily. The Independent Voice reaches 50,000. You could have so much more impact. I walked her to the elevator. I'd rather reach fewer readers with stories that matter than more readers with stories that don't. That was our last conversation. My second year at the Independent Voice brought national recognition that the Herald had never achieved during my tenure there. My investigation into federal immigration detention centers won the George Polk Award and sparked congressional hearings that led to policy reforms. News organizations across the country began citing my work as an example of journalism's continuing relevance and power. The Herald continued struggling with the consequences of prioritizing engagement over impact. They lost several more experienced reporters who were frustrated by the emphasis on viral content over substantive reporting. The newspaper's reputation for investigative excellence, built over decades, was gradually being replaced by a perception of digital media dressed up as serious journalism. 18 months after I left the Herald, Patricia was forced to resign after a series of factual errors in Ashley. Chun's investigations led to multiple retractions and a defamation lawsuit. The board quietly began searching for editors who could restore the credibility that had been compromised by excessive focus on traffic metrics. The vindication I felt wasn't bitter. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving that quality. Journalism still mattered to readers who cared about their communities. Great investigative reporting wasn't about generating clicks or social media engagement. It was about uncovering truth that helped people understand and improve their world. 2 years after joining the Independent Voice, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Investigative Reporters and Editors Annual Conference. The invitation specifically mentioned my demonstration that independent journalism can achieve greater public impact than corporate media constrained by commercial considerations. The auditorium was filled with reporters from outlets large and small, journalists struggling to maintain editorial integrity under increasing pressure to prioritize profit over public service. Patricia was there, seated in the back section, alone. During the reception after my speech, she approached. "Congratulations," she said simply. Her voice carried genuine respect now. That speech captured everything that's been lost in our rush toward digital transformation. "Thank you for coming." She studied my face for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking about that day I let you go from the Herald. I was so worried about quarterly revenue projections that I forgot what made newspapers valuable in the first place." I nodded but remained quiet. "I see now that you weren't being inefficient with your investigations," she continued. "You were being thorough. And thoroughness is what distinguishes real journalism from content marketing." "Fear makes us compromise our principles sometimes," I replied. Patricia smiled sadly. "Indeed it does. I hope you know that watching your success has been both humbling and inspiring." As she walked away, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, but closure. The anger that had motivated me during those first difficult months had transformed into something more valuable, the deep satisfaction of work that mattered, recognition earned through public service, and journalistic integrity validated by stories that changed lives and improved communities. Today, I lead an investigative team that has become a model for independent journalism nationwide. We've proven that thorough reporting serves readers better than rapid content generation, that meaningful stories create more lasting engagement than viral clickbait, that journalism funded by foundations and small donors can outperform corporate media in every measure that actually matters. Sometimes, during the quiet early morning hours when I'm reviewing documents from my latest investigation, I think about my years at the Herald. Not with bitterness anymore, but with gratitude for the lessons learned, about the importance of editorial independence, about the difference between information and journalism, about the responsibility reporters bear for protecting democratic institutions through accountability reporting. In my office, I keep a framed letter from a reader whose family was affected by contaminated water I'd exposed in my investigation. She wrote, "Mr. Harper, your reporting didn't just inform us. It protected us. My children are healthy today because you took the time to uncover the truth when no one else would. That's what journalism is supposed to do." That letter represents everything I'd tried to achieve at the Herald but was never fully empowered to pursue. Patricia taught me something valuable, though not what she intended. She showed me that journalistic integrity isn't negotiable, that public service matters more than profit margins, and that's sometimes the best response to being undervalued. The simply producing work so important that its worth becomes undeniable. The last story I wrote for the Herald was a quick piece about city council meeting highlights, efficient, accessible, and completely forgettable. The first story I wrote for the Independent Voice exposed pharmaceutical fraud that endangered thousands of people. Both stories met their respective organizations' editorial standards, but only one was created in an environment that valued the reader as much as the advertiser. In the end, Patricia was right about one thing: the media landscape was changing. She just misunderstood what direction it was heading. While she chased engagement metrics, I pursued meaningful impact. While she courted viral content, I built lasting accountability. While she focused on immediate traffic, I invested in investigations that would serve communities for years to come. The results, as always, spoke for themselves. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong about your methods. It's proving so thoroughly right about your mission that their mistake becomes a cautionary tale about confusing journalism with entertainment. And in the quiet satisfaction of the story that protects vulnerable people, in the grateful recognition of communities made safer by investigative reporting, I found something better than revenge. I found my calling and the independence to pursue it without compromise.